This is Buffalo State Data Talk, the podcast where we introduce you to how data is used and explore careers that involve data.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Buffalo State Data Talk. I'm your host, Brian Berry, and thank you for joining us for episode 17. Today, we'll be talking to Kevyn Rustici, the Area Vice President and Strategic Human Capital Consultant for Gallagher. Thank you for joining us today, Kevyn.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much for having me.
Could you start us off by giving a general overview of the work that you do as a VP at Gallagher?
Yeah, so I am new to the team, as in 4 months new. We get to have strategic and visionary conversations with some of the top employers throughout our area. So you get to really be on the front lines of understanding the trials and tribulations that they're experiencing right now with this war for talent. And you get to see all these cool articles that come out and really get to see it in real life, right? And how it's starting to have an impact on the business. So I love what I get to do and really bring forth the best solutions to our partners, because at the end of the day, it's how we can provide enough value to them, but more specifically the employees. And then if we improve the lives of employees, at the end of the day, they're going to drive better results for the business. So that's my fun part of my job, is to connecting those dots for a lot of business owners and leaders. And they have a lot more questions than answers right now. So it's fun to data side of it as well from a people analytics perspective.
Well, thanks for the overview. Now that we have an idea of what you do, can you tell me about what a typical day or week looks like for you?
God, that's all over the map. Life is crazy, right? The world of work has totally shifted and totally changed. I'm a new father, so you add that to the mix. But finding the time that's the one thing I learned most in college was time management. There's a lot of different things that happen throughout the day, right? You never know when you're going to get an frantic email from a customer that they're having a major issue and you have to step in and help. Or potentially it's a fascinating conversation that you're having with a up-and-coming business that people have not heard of yet, or they're really interested in getting their name out and they want to have a conversation with you. So like a normal typical day is a lot of fascinating conversations with business leaders. I do a lot of prospecting. Unfortunately, as much work that I would love to do, I still have to go out and kind of get my work today. So a lot of that is building and maintaining relationships. It's doing speaking engagements like this. It's having opportunities to really connect with those in the HR community. But I love what I do, right? I think at the end of the day, if I really was to tell you what I get to do is improve the lives of employees while still driving results for the business, and really get to see that impact that you're having on people's lives. There's nothing better than that.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. So what kind of data does your team collect and use?
Tons and tons of different data. So the side that I'm still learning daily is the benefits, the insurance side of things. Benefits are confusing. I never got the education that I probably needed around benefits, as I'm learning the data side from the healthcare, the pharmaceutical, understanding the claims, understanding all of that stuff. Obviously, that is extremely, extremely data driven. What I focus on the HR side from a data perspective is really 30,000 foot view. And I say 30,000 foot view is I look at turnover data. I look at voluntary and involuntary turnover. I look at absenteeism. I look at time off. And the reason, and what it all makes sense, is it matters what question that we're asking of the data, right? The thing that I have learned most about data, and my buddy is a genius because he basically is a pharmaceutical statistical analysis. He's got his doctorate. He's a genius, right? The guy is teaching me how to do R and all this other stuff. But what I learned from that was these data scientists are amazing. But if they don't know what question to ask the data, it's just numbers on the page. And that's really where it's like a translator, if you want to call it a translator. But you need to understand what business question or human-related question to ask of that data, and how you translate that back to these key stakeholders where it's almost like foreign language. You're challenging their opinions, their thoughts, and their emotions. We get into a lot of the workforce data. So you talk about hours worked, overtime, like I said, turnover by department. You find these little crumbs, and these crumbs that your employees are leaving you are telling you kind of almost how you tell a doctor, I have a cough, I have backaches, I have knee pain. So we get a prescription as to what is going on. It's the same thing as how we use people data in organization, because a lot of organizations are sick right now. They're not really sure where the challenges are. Is it a 5-alarm fire, or is it only a smoking, smoldering wastebasket, right? Size fire. Again, the data that we collect particularly is what question we're looking to solve from our business challenge.
Cool. So I don't know how detailed you can be about this question, but what is the volume of data that you work with, and how do you store that data?
Great question. This brings up an important point. So I don't want to comment on that particularly, but what I will say is there is a lot of responsibility when it comes to data, right? And that part needs to be at the forefront of all data science and all data programs and conversations, is because it is scary, especially when you're talking about employee data. People want to know what you're doing with that. The privacy laws in New York State and obviously the United States are not as strict as some of the European countries. But still, you have to be careful. Make sure that we remove all names, right? We make sure that we remove all identifying characteristics of some of these individuals for these projects. And really understanding the intent behind some of these projects first before we get involved in those is really important, because sometimes you can find some scary things. You can find some really scary things. And depending on what type of leadership are in leadership, they could take that in a good way or a really bad way. So you really have to be cautious with how you're using data and the expectations that you're creating around it. Because I always say it's data, insights, action. You still have to apply that human intellectual capital and social capital that we talk about in roles and positions. That's where you have insights. And then you really work together collectively to drive results and have actionable results. That's kind of what I would say about the data privacy side. It needs to be talked about more probably, especially as we explore. There's some scary things that employers do. I mean, read every email that you're sending, every text, everything. Like that's to the degree of people analytics that I don't want to see. I mean, I don't think you need to be that invasive to really get a temperature of the room. Is this person happy? Are they fully engaged? Are we getting the most out of them? It seems a little bit too intrusive for me personally.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot. I mean, you think that's out there, a lot of it. So, and probably more so than I even know.
Yeah, the SHIELD Act and the GDRP come to mind when you're talking about that. So, and again, I'm not sure how far you can get into this, but once you've collected and cleaned the data, what happens next? Like, how is the data being used?
Yeah, so that's probably the hardest part. So let's be clear. Like the clean data, right? We can almost obsess over the cleanliness of the data, right? Almost to a fault. It's almost like over-analysis paralysis, right? So the clean data part, again, when I focus first on the people, the process, and the technology, if we have the right people in the right seats and the process is clean, then we know that we're getting clean data. And I like to leverage technology to automate as much administrative task as possible. But then once we're dealing with a clean data set, that's when the fun starts, right? That's when we start to work backwards. A lot of the people in biology classes today, the scientific method. That's the same way that I apply it to people data, right? What question, what do we want? And then we work backwards. That's it. Then we start asking questions.
Nice. So what do the data scientists produce from the results that you find? Like a dashboard, written reports?
Typically, I like dashboards. I accept when dashboards are used inappropriately, right? You see a lot of dashboards thrown up on, if I was to talk about the working world, managers, right? Managers have these dashboards. Some of them are beautiful, right? But if it's just numbers, again, and they don't really sure how they impact them or what's particular to them or why they should care, it's just a beautiful dashboard on a page that somebody spent a lot of time on, right? And a lot of money, probably. So really, it depends. I like to put it in concise reports. I think that's probably the best way because, in data, it's only as good as the story you're able to tell with it. If you're putting up on, we did this analysis and we did this and this and this, and you're sitting in a room with key stakeholders and business owners, they're going to not follow you and not care what you're saying. So you really got to talk in their language is what I found. So storytelling is probably the most valuable part of that, and being able to relate it back to them. That's really, if I was to tell you too, where the money is, that's where the money and magic happen in all data. Is you have to be able to be, again, that master translator to understand What's on the minds of these business leaders, and how can you take that data and tell them a story in the words that they're going to know and understand?
Yeah, storytelling is such a big part of it. Massive.
And charting, because the charts are also that's the visualization piece is another, like that's an art in data science, is visualizations and knowing which visualization that you need to use and when. It's a very, very powerful tool when used effectively, but if you use the wrong graph or pie chart or something, your massive finding could totally miss the mark.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to that. So are there any specific software technologies or programming languages like Tableau or Excel?
I'm good at Excel. My buddy that I referenced earlier, R, I have 2 books of R from O'Reilly that I am cranking through, as well as a couple other tools that he gave me, because what I've learned in R so far is the ability to rip through massive sets of data. I am rarely dealing with the sets of data sets that I would need R to do right now, because, again, you don't want to get too in the weeds in some of these projects because they don't have enough data to start doing predictive analytics in most cases. R is what I really like. Python is another one that obviously a lot of people use. But R I have found easier, I guess, to make the transition from Excel to because you can still use some of the common language, or if you understand how to write that language. So that's what I've been using, R. And then I like Tableau. Tableau is probably the easiest charting technology out there, like for visualizations. I mean, I would say that's the cat's meow from my perspective as far as ease of use.
Yeah, I think many would agree with you too. And I know this is really maybe difficult to try and predict, but what technologies do you think would be the most important to know for the future?
God. This is a passion of mine. I love talking about the future of work, and especially if students are listening, right? I would say don't get in love with any technology because it's changing at such an exponential rate that what you are training on today, again, might not even be relevant in 6 months to a year. So that's why I think you're seeing more organizations too, outside of college, switch to these skills-based talent management strategies, where it's, hey, we're hiring for traits, character traits, that people can learn skills. We need characters, we need the ability, we need the individuals that are willing to learn, listen, and learn new tricks kind of thing. So you're kind of seeing these people create those types of models. But technology, I don't want to give you any names because I think they're going to change at such a pace that it doesn't matter.
So could you talk about a challenge that you and your team had to overcome and what you did to solve it?
One project in particular comes to mind because it also tells you, I guess, the infancy of upstate New York and its comfort level with data. I won't name any names, but I will say a healthcare system or a provider put together a analytics team. They put the CEO in the room. They put the CFO in the room, VP of HR, a lot of highly compensated people in a room, right? So when the project was brought to me, I said, well, what's the CEO's goal, right? Does he want to be the best of the healthcare system in this particular area, or why? You need a why behind what he wants out of this, right? And I think there's that perception that a lot of people still don't know the difference between data analytics and metrics. I think there's a lot of people still don't understand the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. I think people see data, right? They see it everywhere. They see it in more and more news articles. So therefore, they need to have it, except they don't know what they need it for. So I challenged them. And then finally, they came back with a little bit different of an image. Well, we want to know this about the workforce, or we want to know this. And again, I pushed back a little bit more as like, that's fine, but you need big picture. You're spending a lot of money. You're putting a lot of people in one room, and they're all looking at each other as, what problems are we supposed to solve? So the deeper that we dove and the more questions that we asked, they started answering their own questions, like I told you earlier. Oh, we should be looking at this. Yes, you should. You should be looking at this. Yes, we should. And by the end of it, it's like, okay, now I know what I can get out of data. And that's really what you want people to learn.
What first made you interested in working in your field?
I stumbled into HR, and everybody says the same thing. I worked for organizations that treated HR like the redheaded ugly stepchild. That's how I viewed HR. ADP, when I started with them, and they had a lot of data sets because they paid 1 in 5 Americans, and they had this data cloud. It was fascinating to me, and that's where it really clicked, and I said, that's the ticket for me. Data is not going anywhere. Data jobs are really picking up and aren't going to go anywhere and anytime soon. And I just said, this is interesting to me, to be able to finally get businesses to see how people impact the business was fascinating. And I'll tell you the 2 things that I needed to hear. 22% of businesses use data and science to drive business decisions. I found that erroneous. I could not believe that. And then just how many organizations continue to not understand the value of their employees. I guess.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So and that's really where I was like, okay, so you're telling me, why do you promote who we promote was the first question that I wanted to answer, because I've been passed over for promotions. Like, why aren't we challenging these ways of thought and just asking the question why? And I got obsessed with the question why, which brings you to data because it's the only way to get down to the real answers of it.
So I know that time is limited as a new father, but are you still able to set time aside for professional development? And if so, what kind of activities do you do?
Every single day. It's really, really important to find your time. I call it reinvesting in yourself. You really are. Like, for that same point that I made earlier, that we're going to be in this cycle of things changing so fast that you better have that intellectual skill set or that social skill set, or capital, like I call it, because that really is the only thing that makes you stand out and differentiate yourself. It really is. What you have learned on the job, what you've taken away from those experiences, that's all stuff that you own. And then what do you do with that information is the next question. And then keep asking that same question. Keep peeling back that onion, because that's really where I got to where I am today. So I do a lot of reading to answer your question, a lot of scientific journals I read. I like scientific studies when it comes to human capital because they have a lot more time and energy. A lot of it's academic. They have a lot more resources than I could ever feasibly do to put together some of these case studies that they do. And it's just fascinating to see what they come out with.
Yeah, it was perfect. Many of our listeners are younger, like high school undergrads. So as someone in a leadership role who has mentored students, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in working as a data analyst?
Get good at listening. Probably is my one. That's probably my biggest tip. I think, again, is you have to be able to listen. Well, I guess ask the right questions too. Those are probably the 2 things, because if you ask the right questions and you actually listen, you can help people solve a lot of problems. You just have to know what questions to ask, and then can you support that or can you not support that with data? And so I think it's a great field to be in because it's so diverse. There's so much variance, and that's really what I like about the data field, is that there is so much variance. So you'll find more of your purpose with the alignment of what you're studying. What data are you studying? Like my one buddy, he loves cancer research. That's what he loves, is like understanding the trial information. That shit would be boring as hell for me, Brian. I like the people perspective, and my buddy can't stand it. But it's preference, right? And that I found my purpose in my meeting more towards the human piece, because I'm a feeler. I feel for people, and I just want to have their voices heard and valued. And really, that's what I get to do every day, is kind of explain to the senior level what the employees want, and what they're delivering today is kind of missing the mark, and where improvements need to be made and how.
Cool. Since you've worked in HR and understand data science, could you give our listeners some tips for applying for jobs and internships, such as how to get through ATS or applicant tracking system software?
Networking is a way around those ATS systems. If you have somebody that is going to tell that HR representative, that recruiter, hey, I have a candidate coming over, his name is Kevyn Rustici. Keep an eye out for their resume. I really like you to pull that one, and I really like you having a conversation. Now, that gets you right around the ATS system and probably puts you front and center in the top 10 candidates for that particular position. So, I hated the system, I hated the game, but instead of sitting there and complaining about it, you had to figure a way around it. So that's where I'm telling you, learn networking and get your butt on LinkedIn because it's a great place to start to build your brand, define yourself on who you are, and building the connections that you want to build at some of these companies. And do yourself another favor. Do an internship before you sign yourself up for a long career in a particular field. Get exposed to a lot of different things because this thing called the Great Resignation, that's a lot of people doing a gut check and saying, I can't do this the rest of my life.
And finally, before we let you go, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know that we didn't cover today?
If I can help you, reach out. If you have questions, reach out. If there's anything I can do to help you in any single way and I can make an introduction, I would be more than happy to do that. If I was to leave things to think about is invest in yourself today because not a lot of other people are going to tomorrow. You're in charge of your own destiny. And I think building those relationships, developing trusting relationships with your teachers, leveraging these professors, it's amazing what these people do and the commitment that they give you of their time and energy. And I just wish I did more of that when I was in your shoes because it did myself a disservice and probably behind the 8 ball. But the world is big. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and it's really an exciting time because when Brian probably first got his job and I was first getting my job, there wasn't a lot of jobs like this, and the employee was never in the driver's seat. So like seeing where we are today and seeing like everything that's happening, it's pretty incredible.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. It was truly a pleasure.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you and the students, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you.
And to all our listeners, if you haven't already checked out our previous podcasts, they are available wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information about starting your career as a data scientist, go to www.dataanalytics.buffalostate.edu. Don't forget to subscribe so that you get notifications each time we release a new episode of Buffalo State Data Talk.